pumps? I don't even know what that means.
No one knows what it means, but it's provocative.
No, it's not. It's
Gets
gross.
the people going.
So let's learn about food labels. From my video on milk to my last video covering the Farm System Reform Act and veganism, we've covered actions at the political level and those at the individual. I guess I see political action as being inherently a group action. What political action is engaged in changing things solely for the individual or is based solely in individual actions. I mean, I think even the understanding that the personal is political is not meant to improve the life of the individual woman who came up with it, but the lives of all women. I guess I imagine the spectrum between the political and the individual, and I'm trying to find a synthesis or a harmony between the two. As a topic in food sustainability, food labels may be one such synthesis. On the one hand, I think group effort is necessary to change the ways we structure how we will provide information to the consumer about their food and where it came from. On the other hand, we can focus our perspective in as the consumer and consider what choices we can make individually to ensure we're considering the lives of our fellow actors. Often, it would seem that some's frustration lies to one side of the spectrum. Some take the political, group-centered mindset that if I'm one of the few in my community who's going to make the effort to take a look at these food labels, how is that going to make a significant impact on the lives of farm animals? While for others who find their frustrations at the individual level, they may think, how is it possible for me to keep up with all these food labels and what they mean? Like, they're so confusing. One says cage-free, the other says pasture-raised, but how can I know which is better? My goal here is to provide a more thorough understanding of food labels and also their limitations to address the concerns of both the individual and the political. Let's start at simply what a food label is, or maybe what it's not. When I speak of food labels here, I'm imagining them in the sense that they're boxes providing supplemental information on the food we buy. In other words, it's not the label telling us what the food is, be that a certain kind of meat or a particular style of bread. In the sense I refer to food labels, they're like a sticker, something extra placed on top of the identifying information of a food to provide further information about the food. In this use, a food label gives us what we could think of as secondary characteristics of the food. Not ones necessary for the food to be what it is, but ones that give us more information on that particular product. For instance, somewhere on a carton of food containing the objects laid by chickens, we're going to find the word eggs. That, in the sense we're talking about here, is not a food label. That carton has a box of words saying cage-free, however, is. A carton of eggs doesn't have to be cage-free to be a carton of eggs, but a carton of eggs that are cage-free can be identified as a certain kind of carton of eggs. So food labels, again, in the sense we're talking about here, give us further information about our food. At this point, it's important to realize where that information is coming from and also the purpose of that information. I can't imagine any food label that we'd consider negative, for example. Like, you're not going to find at the store a carton of eggs that says not cage-free or raised on a CAFO. Therefore, we can assume that most food labels are positive in nature and are placed there by the seller to identify their product in a positive light. Okay, so at this point we know that food labels provide us with additional information about the food, and generally it's the case that they're placed on food to give a positive characteristic, something that would make us want to buy that product. Now, we could come across several different types of positively identifying labels. The two biggest ones that we'd encounter would be those that identify health benefits and those that identify animal welfare benefits. Some may offer both. Obviously, here we're going to focus on those food labels that are animal welfare focused. With this framework, let's focus in on the examples of food labels meant to make us feel good about our purchases, but are unfortunately empty promises. Let's look at 3 labels from the Animal Welfare Institute's Consumer's Guide to Food Labels and Animal Welfare, specifically its section entitled Beware These Labels. By the way, this document is linked below, and it's a backbone for most of the recommendations provided here. Let's look at the ubiquitous cage-free label in 2 different foods. The first on bird meat such as chicken or turkey. Cage-free in this instance doesn't really tell us anything about the birds, in the US at least, because these animals aren't raised in cages. The label makes us feel better when buying chicken or turkey, but in reality, it doesn't distinguish from how these birds are typically raised. The second instance of this label could be on egg or egg products. It's when chickens are raised for their eggs that they're typically caged. In this case, cage-free actually does give us a slightly better reality for these birds. However, cage-free doesn't mean that birds still aren't crammed into a cooped barn. Next up, we have here various labels indicating to us that animals are raised in some way that might be pleasant to our palate. However, most of these labels often have no verification process backing them, and the subjectivity gives little assurance that the care for these actors is a primary concern. This looks like a legit label. It's from an independent company that audits farms from the level of welfare provided to the animals, so it's gotta be good. Unfortunately, this label highlights the issue that even labels with third-party authentication are not always top tier. In this case, the standards that FACTA uses are pretty much industry standard, which could mean lack of outdoor access, cramming of birds in a barn. This is one of the pictures on the company's website, and while I'm not familiar with animal care practices, this doesn't seem like a whole lot of space for all these birds. Looking further into some of their standards for egg-laying hens, they require at least 9 square feet of space per 100 hens in a house, which again just doesn't seem like much. Like, this is 9 square feet, and all my roommate's toys can barely fit in there. The FACTA certification is certainly thorough, but the issues that arise when comparing it to other certifications come from the standards that are expected. So what food labels might provide higher standards? Let's look at 3 different labels spanning AWI's evaluation from fair to next best to best. From AWI's fair designation, let's look at this bundle of similar labels. The cage-free label for eggs that we discussed earlier actually falls in this designation. And I think the primary factor differentiating the beware designation from the fair designation is the level of objectivity provided. While something like ethically raised is fairly nebulous, pasture raised paints a clear picture of the animal's lifestyle. And while these standards may still be self-imposed, they can at least be something that could be labeled misleading if advertising charges were brought against the company. Finally, we bring ourselves to the next best and best designation. Again, remember that these are designations by AWI, which itself is a nonprofit standardizing organization whose own standards they find to fit in the best designation. Possible bias aside, I see there are several characteristics in their grading process that distinguish best from next best. If and how much outdoor access is provided to the animals, the space allowance, for example, number of acres per 1,000 birds, what physical alterations are permitted and whether these alterations are given with pain relief, whether the audit includes all points of animal care, from breeding to housing to transportation, whether the farms have to comply with all standards or only a certain percentage of them, and whether all company locations must be audited or just a representative sample. For the next best section, let's look at a common label that I have at least seen, the Certified Humane label from the Humane Farm Animal Care Organization. The positives that make it better than fair. Animals must be provided with a certain space allowance as well as enrichment. The audit includes most points of animal care, and all standards must be met. However, it fails to meet best since outdoor access is not required. Some physical alterations are allowed, and only a sample of locations have to be audited. Now, I did mention at the beginning that things can get complex, right? So while the Humane Farm Animal Care's Certified Humane label only meets next best, their Certified Humane for pasture-raised eggs actually does meet AWI's best designation. In this case, because of a minimum of 2.5 acres of outdoor access per 1,000 birds, which is roughly 12,000 times the 9 square foot area I previously mentioned, with only 10 times the amount of birds. A significant improvement, I'd say. And this also speaks to the gradations in care that can be provided when talking about space. I'm not an animal care scientist, and those that are could tell us more about the amount of land that's appropriate to raise particular animals. With that, let's look at one more label in the best section, the Global Animal Partnership labels. There's actually different levels of this certification, with only levels 4, 5, and 5+ meeting AWI's best designation. At level 4 and above, feedlots are prohibited. This ensures not only outdoor access, but also a minimum space allowance, since the purpose of a feedlot is to confine a large number of animals to a small area to limit the amount that they can move, and thus decrease the amount of time it takes to fatten them up. At level 5, no physical alterations to the animals are permitted. At all levels, full compliance of standards audited at all locations at almost all points in animal care is required. Now, almost the entirety of this information comes from the Animal Welfare Institute. As far as I can tell, the organization seems fairly committed to providing accurate, actionable information. But bias isn't really my concern here. What I wanted to do was provide a framework to look at food labels so that we can better determine the accuracy of food labels when we're at the store. As I mentioned before, part of the purpose of the food label is to make us see particular products in a positive light. By looking beyond the good-natured feeling we may get in a kind label, we can begin to see the reality of the animals' lives that lie behind the products we buy. Understandably, many would find it naive to believe that a square-inch label on a piece of meat can give us a full picture of the animal whose life it was that gave us that product. For that reason, I think that in addition to understanding food labels, and maybe even easier than trying to discern them, despite all the work that I just put into telling you about them, is simply eating less or maybe even no meat. I thought about making this first part a breakdown of the AWI's entire food label PDF, but we're all smart enough here to be able to learn this ourselves. What I hope to have been able to accomplish is a way to identify food labels at a level that understands them within the structure of our society, and where we could take food labels into the future to promote a society that aligns with our values. Before we leave today, I do want to point out some foods, such as milk-fed veal, which AWI advises never to eat, since no matter what the humane designation of the farm, there's almost certainly animal suffering associated with these. The following is one example. The shark species most of us picture, and also ones that tend to be most commonly fished for their fins, are known as obligate ram ventilators. They are obligated to ventilate or breathe by continually moving forward or ramming through the water. Because these species of sharks don't have the ability to pump water over their gills, they're destined to continually cruise the seas. Their tails provide thrust, and they even have specialized skin called denticles, which improve their hydrodynamics. But their fins, primarily the pectoral and dorsal, are what provide the shark with its lift and directionality. So when a shark's fins are cut off and they're thrown back into the ocean, we could imagine it similar to having our own limbs removed, a lead weight attached to our body, and then being thrown into the ocean ourselves. In both cases, that creature slowly sinks to the bottom, slowly asphyxiates, and slowly dies. This lacks sustainability in at least two regards. The first with regard to the shark species as a whole. Because they have a slow reproductive rate and an estimated 75 million sharks are killed every year, the population of many species is on a downward trend, with many popping up on endangered species lists. The second way in which this lacks sustainability is on a more individual level. For it's an individual shark, an individual being, an actor that suffers. I'm going to need one more video to do this justice. Now, having completed the third video, I think I'll continue to return back to this topic in the years to come because there's a lot more to be said. In fact, I just read an interesting article on the ethics of animal activism and how far we should take it. I think Tyelar, who commented on the last video, summarized it best when they said we should continue pushing the envelope. From my perspective, we've both come a long way and also have a long way to go. As Tyelar says, it's important we always keep that end goal in mind. And it's important to envision and agree upon what that end goal is. I myself still have a lot to learn. Tyelar mentions how my use of humane is interesting, considering we would almost certainly treat no human like this. I need to sit with this and decide how I can incorporate this into my own vision of where I would like to be with my actions. As an individual, I think this will mean stepping more toward veganism, if not adopting it entirely. Animal activism goes beyond the individual, though, because it is a situation fraught with negative externalities. Meaning the structure of our society is such that the logistics of how we get our food allow for the mistreatment of our fellow actors. It's a social issue that requires collective action, in some cases in the form of politics, in others in the form of our societal expectations. We can bring issues like CAFOs and shark finning to an end by both banning these practices and also shifting our societal norms such that there's a high cost to one's social status for participating, as we currently do with something like murder. Finally, I want to address those whose eyes begin to gloss over when they hear the words animal activism. First off, I'm pleasantly surprised if you've listened to the end of this video. Maybe you feel that this isn't something that's necessary for you to lead a better life. All I'd ask is that you consider everything I've said here and try to incorporate it into your understanding and perception of the world as you move forward from this point. As we all move forward together, I think it will be humility and expanded awareness of the world around us, which will lead us toward the goal we envision. Thank you to all those who have listened to my tirades. This one might be the longest yet. My SMART goal for this video: end my seafood consumption, effective immediately. I'd like to provide a definition for humility that I heard once, which I honestly can't source for you. Humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. I hope you think of yourself less this week.